I thought we survived.
We thought it was over, that the virus had died out. But it only waited.
What happens when the world has changed for nearly 3 decades? 28 years later brings us back to a familiar chilling universe, starring Cillian Murphy and Aaron Taylor Johnson. The teaser promises intense thrills and fresh horrors. Let's dive into what's in store for us. So, what's the story of 28 years later all about? Well, it's set nearly 30 years after the first outbreak, when the rage virus first turned ordinary people into terrifying fast-moving killers. The survivors thought they had seen the worst of it, that maybe the virus had burned itself out, and the world could start to rebuild. But in this new film, we find out that the virus never really went away. It's been hiding, evolving, and is now even more dangerous than before. The survivors face a world that's barely recognizable, where trust is almost non-existent, and the line between friends and foes is blurrier than ever. For fans of the original 28 Days Later and 20 Weeks Later, this new movie is a long-awaited continuation of a world we've been haunted by for years. If you remember, 28 Days Later was all about the immediate shock and panic following the virus outbreak, with Cillian Murphy's character Jim waking up in a desolate London. The streets were empty and society had collapsed almost overnight. It wasn't just about avoiding the infected, it was about dealing with the breakdown of humanity itself. Then, 28 Weeks Later showed us what happens when an attempt to rebuild society fails, with the infection spreading even faster as people struggle to regain control. Now, in 28 years later, the world has changed completely. The virus has evolved, and so has the way people live. This isn't just another outbreak story. The survivors are faced with something much worse, a world where the infection has reshaped everything, and no place is truly safe. What makes this new film particularly exciting is how it takes the ideas of survival and infection to a whole new level. It's not just about running from infected people anymore. It's about confronting what happens to humanity after decades of living with this kind of fear and danger. You might be wondering, what makes 28 Years Later stand out in the crowded world of zombie and post-apocalyptic films? One big reason is that this franchise has never really been about zombies in the traditional sense. The infected in these movies aren't undead, they're living people who've been overtaken by a virus that fills them with uncontrollable rage. That difference might seem small, but it changes everything. These films are about the horror of what humans are capable of when everything falls apart. They dive deep into the themes of survival, desperation, and how quickly civilization can crumble. Now imagine seeing Cillian Murphy return as Jim after almost 30 years. He was the heart of 28 Days Later, and seeing his character evolve after everything he's been through is going to be powerful. Jim has lived through the outbreak, seen society fall, and now he's back, facing a world that's even more broken. Alongside him is Aaron Taylor Johnson, whose character brings a new energy and perspective to the story. He's part of a new generation of survivors, someone who never really knew the world before the outbreak. These two actors together create a fascinating dynamic. One who remembers life before the virus and one who only knows a world of chaos and infection. Their casting is a huge reason why fans should be excited. Cillian Murphy's return taps into the nostalgia of those who loved the first film, while Aaron Taylor Johnson brings a fresh intensity that will resonate with new audiences. Chemistry between the two, plus their incredible acting abilities, promises to elevate the film in ways that go beyond just the plot. It's not just about the scars, it's about how these characters navigate the emotional and psychological toll of living in such a bleak world. So how does 28 Years Later compare to the earlier films in terms of tone and scale? Well, while 28 Days Later was more about the initial shock of the virus and 28 Weeks Later focused on the failed attempts to rebuild, 28 Years Later explores a world where the infection has been a part of life for so long that people have adapted in strange, often unsettling ways. The scope is much larger now. The survivors aren't just dealing with the virus itself, they're dealing with what happens when a society has been broken for decades. Entire regions are wastelands, while isolated groups of survivors have created their own ways of life, some of which are more terrifying than the infected themselves. And yes, the virus has evolved. It's no longer as predictable as it once was. Each mutation brings new horrors, making it even harder for survivors to know what they're up against. This adds a whole new layer of tension to the story. How do you fight something that keeps changing? This is a question that haunts the characters throughout the film, and it keeps the audience on edge, knowing that danger could come from anywhere, at any time. The film also takes us beyond the UK, which was the central setting of the first two movies. In 28 years later, we get to see how the infection has spread across the world, and how different parts of the globe have coped or failed to cope with the ongoing threat. There are hauntingly beautiful scenes of iconic locations that have been left in ruins, overgrown and forgotten. These settings not only serve as a backdrop for the action, but also highlight the sheer scale of the devastation. The world has been reshaped by the infection, and the landscapes reflect that. Visually, 28 years later is expected to be even more stunning than its past generations. The filmmakers have used a mix of practical effects and cutting-edge CGI to bring the infected to life in ways that are both terrifying and believable. The cinematography captures the isolation and desolation of the world, using muted colors and stark lighting to create a sense of hopelessness. But it's not all bleak. There are moments of beauty, where the survivors find brief breaks from the horror. And these moments are made all the more powerful because of how they contrast with the darkness around them. The themes of the movie go far beyond just survival though. One of the biggest questions the film asks is, what does it mean to be human after nearly 30 years of living in fear? The survivors are no longer just fighting the infected. They're fighting to hold on to their humanity in a world that's constantly trying to strip it away. The film explores themes of loss, fear, hope, and regeneration, all while diving into the psychological effects of long-term survival. Finding the strength to continue when everything familiar is gone poses a daunting challenge, especially when the world feels beyond saving. With today's real-world issues like pandemics and global crisis, 28 years later feels especially relevant. It taps into the fears many people have about what happens when society breaks down and what lengths we might go to in order to survive. But it also offers a glimmer of hope, showing that even in the darkest times, people can find ways to hold on to their humanity. One of the most exciting aspects of 28 years later is how it ties back to the earlier films, while also pushing the story forward in new directions. Fans have been speculating for years about what the next chapter would look like, and now we finally get to see it. There is a lot of anticipation around whether certain characters from the previous films will return, and what new threats the survivors will face. Will the infection finally be contained, or has it evolved into something unstoppable? These are the kinds of questions that have kept fans on the edge of their seats. The technical and visual aspects of the film are another reason why it's set to be a standout. Advances in filmmaking technology mean that the infected are more terrifying than ever before. The use of practical effects combined with CGI allows the filmmakers to create creatures that are both realistic and horrifying. Do let us know your thoughts in the comment section. We will see you guys next time.